All right, welcome everyone to our July Tap Talk. Thank you so much for being here this evening. These are a collaborative effort between the 500 Women Scientists Corvallis Pod and Block 15. Some of you may remember before the pandemic, we were in person at Block 15 at their Southtown location here in Corvallis. These Tap Talks are a way that the Corvallis Pod of 500 Women Scientists works towards the overall organization's mission of making science more open, inclusive, and accessible. And this evening, we'll have about a 40-minute talk from Linda, who will introduce in a second, and then we'll have time at the end for questions and answers. So you can put them in the chat if you'd like, or if we're a smaller group, but we can have folks on mute, but I'll moderate the Q&A at the end. If you're worried about the question leaving your brain and you want to just enter it in the chat when it comes up, go ahead, and I'll come back to any questions that were entered earlier. So tonight's Tap Talk is an exciting extension of our June Tap Talk. We'll be digging deeper, and I'm kind of proud of that pun, digging deeper into composting. And so Linda will be presenting on making compost work for you. And Linda's been gardening organically since 1980 here in the Willamette Valley. She's a lifetime member of Oregon Tilth, a former board member of 10 Rivers Food Web, and a volunteer and organizer of the annual soil amendment sale for the past 10 years. From 2009 to 2012, she revitalized and reorganized the HP Employee Organic Garden and was a lead for the HP Corvallis Sustainability Network. She loves growing food, and her urban gardening includes doing compost in small spaces. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Linda, and you can go ahead and share your screen.
And you should see it over here. There we go. Now
that looks great. Thank you. We're good.
Goodness. And I'll minimize this, move it over here. Okay, so there's my snappy little first slide. And I pulled this off the web someplace. I thought it was really cute. And here's our agenda. I'm going to speed it up. What is soil? Why compost? Give you some basics, give you some how to fix it if it's broken, prescriptions for fixing compost. If you're in a really small space, you might want to try Bokashi, an amazing new thing called biochar, which is actually an ancient thing. Questions and answers, and a resource list for further inquiry. So soil, it's composed of microorganisms, moisture, air, and rock in the form of sand, silt, clay, plus decaying or static organic matter. So soil is a living complex of many different types of creatures: fungi, amoebas, ciliates, rotifers, nematodes, thousands of different creatures that don't even have names that we've just started to discover. And like I said, you can make your own better. You can do it yourself better than you can buy it, because it's very delicate, because it's a living thing. So I'm going to just go through this really quickly. The rock in our soil is three different things. It's that's supposed to be a giant sphere, and that represents sand. And then the smaller dot is supposed to be a tiny sphere of silt, and both of those have no electrical charge. And then clay is actually plate-like and usually only 2 microns or 0.002 millimeters thick. So clay is actually dissolved minerals that were deposited over time into sheets or layers of solid material. And because of this negative static charge, it holds nutrients, because most nutrients are cations with a positive charge. Unlike sand and silt, which do not hold cations, they don't hold nutrients very well. Clay soil is great for holding water and nutrients, but it does need organic matter to realize its potential. That's why people come up, they go, "Oh, I have this horrible clay soil." I'm like, "You have wonderful clay soil. Let's add some soil amendments. Let's add some organic matter." And then I really love Dr. James Cassidy, who soil science. He says, what's your gardening question? The answer is add organic matter. He's just great. Okay, so now this is soil composition. We're in a temperate region. And so up to 50% of the soil is organic matter, especially in the valleys, not up on the hills so much, but in tropical regions or in places that have been really washed out, right? Then there's only 5% of soil is organic matter, which means the water and the nutrients are not held in the soil for very long. So I'm going to ask you to remember this distinction between temperate regions and tropical regions, because it'll come up later in the talk. So again, why compost? You can go to something like the soil amendment sale and buy it in bulk. You can go to various garden stores and you can buy it in bulk. But when you look at your soil is a very much a living thing. And I just love this graphic because it shows you what's down under there, right? It's all kinds of, we just see the earthworms, but there's so much life in the soil. It's just amazing. And so your average compost, this is something you can buy locally, is nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, NPK. That's what those three numbers, 322. And this is a nice composted chicken manure fertilizer, but it's still not as good as what you can make on your own. It does have some micronutrients because it is compost. All compost will have micronutrients because it comes from living matter, and all living things have micronutrients, some nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And so the basics are, you want to use browns, which are like dead leaves, greens, which is like your kitchen waste, water and air in the proper proportions so that you generate a nice living compost pile. That's the key. The key is to have all these things in balance. And compost, if you do it correctly, keeps nitrogen in water-soluble form. This is my graphical illustration of how the nitrogen is. This is a NH4. So most of the Earth's atmosphere is approximately 70% nitrogen gas. So that's N2. Plants can't use nitrogen in the gas form. They have to absorb it from the roots in a water-soluble compound, such as this NH4. And soil nitrogen is a limiting factor to plant growth in many cases. Industrial fertilizers are fossil fuel based, meaning that they take some part of that oil they pump out of the ground and turn it into industrialized fertilizers, instead of making it into something to put into your car. Because of course it's ammonium. And so that's just part of the building blocks of all fossil fuels, or all these organic molecules. Currently, we know that fossil fuel fixed nitrogen is less than half of what is used for food production. That's really good, because when I was going to school, we thought that was far different. We now know that many more plant species form symbiotic bonds and actually fix nitrogen. So that's good. But we want to keep that nitrogen in this form. We don't want to generate methane. We don't want to lose our nitrogen out of our compost. So when you do composting right, you don't have a stinky compost and you don't lose your nitrogen. And this is a book. This is the first of things that I recommend. This is a wonderful book. Composting really is an art. There's a science component to it, but there's also an art in that you look at what you have and you improvise, right? So the complete compost gardening guide, I think this is just, I was composting for years and years and years, and I picked this up at like the book bin or something. I started looking through it and I went, oh my gosh, I have to have this book because they explain it so nicely. So it's easy to read. They have beautiful illustrations. And I think they have a copy at the library. So this ratio of 25 carbon to 1 nitrogen, that means your compost is going to be filled with a lot of leaves. That's the most common mistake that I see people making, is they don't put in enough carbon. They don't put in enough dead leaves or whatever other carbon source you want to use. Clean straw is okay. Just make sure that it hasn't had herbicides put on it. That's another thing that's very important. All your feedstock should not be subjected to any poisons that will inhibit plant growth. Some of the pesticides, herbicides rather, that they use are very detrimental to plant growth, and some of them persist for a couple of years at least. So be very careful about your clean feedstock. If you buy straw, wheat straw, ask them if they applied herbicides and what kind. And if they have biopersistent herbicides on it, it's not good for your compost. Okay, size matters. Large chunks don't compost quickly. Especially if you're using worms, but in any event, you want to chop up your watermelon rind. You don't want to put a half a watermelon rind in there. Chop your things up before you put them in the compost. This one book was even saying you can compost your dryer lint if you have cotton clothes. So here's another prescription to fix a nasty compost. Agricultural grade gypsum is very cheap. I think the last time I bought it was like $14.20 a bag, and it comes in a powder form in a 50-pound bag. You can pay more for a smaller amount, like Down to Earth, they sell a nice gypsum. It's the same thing. But if you buy it in 50 pounds and store it in your garage or something, you'll have it. And gypsum is wonderful. It's like they call it 1,000 tiny hoes because it really works well for clay soils like we have around here. It's a moderately soluble source of the essential plant nutrients, calcium and sulfur, and it can improve overall plant growth. And you can add it to your compost as you're doing your compost, or you can rehabilitate a stinky wet compost using gypsum. It's neutral in pH, and pH is the power of hydrogen. But please don't use gypsum from housing projects. Sheetrock has glue in it, and it will add a toxic load to your compost. So if you want to rehabilitate a stinky wet compost, you'll have to move it from the pile that it's in or the container over to another one and add dry brown material in layers between the stinky, gloppy, wet stuff, and then sprinkle some gypsum on every layer, and then keep doing those layers. And then after you do the rehabilitation, cover it with a waterproof material if it's winter time, and you make sure that it doesn't get too much water. And then there's a note. Many people ask about pests and rats. If you are concerned about those sort of pests, you'll have to have a completely contained system. You'll have to have wire mesh or something else to keep them out, or else they'll basically come in there. It's food. Compost is food for other things. So you're going to have a really tight compost, including on the bottom, because they'll dig down underneath. It is a problem. So you might consider doing an alternative type of composting in a sealed container, that not sealed airtight, but maybe. I'll explain that later. So let's talk a little bit more about pH. Now that here's some acid examples and some alkaline examples, just to give you a little bit of about this number, the power of hydrogen. 7 is neutral, that's water. The alkaline or basic is the other thing, acid and base. So the talk's not really about pH, but this is just an example. The other thing is we never add pH changers to the compost because the compost is slightly acidic and you want it to stay that way during the composting process. So you can have a lot of fun with composting, believe it or not. And I found this really cute graphic, vermicomposting, of these cute little worms. And you can learn all about worm composting. There's special worms, Icinia fetida, which are not regular earthworms, And these creatures only live in an environment rich with rotting vegetables and will not live in the soil alone. So they are safe to introduce to your garden compost. And worms work the compost so you don't have to. You don't have to turn it. Worm composting is a cold rather than hot composting, so it's much easier to do. You don't have to, set your calendar to, I have to turn the compost every 3 or 4 days to keep it hot. You do have to have large enough bins or keep them inside during freezing cold, because these worms will freeze to death. They do process your waste quickly. They don't particularly like the following: meat, cheese, bread, orange rinds, brassicas, those are cole crops, eggshells, and bones. And size matters for all compost, but it's very important when feeding worms. I remember I got an old blender and I used to blenderize some of my compost to feed it to my worms to really get them going. They love that. They reproduce very quickly. I haven't done that in years. Now I'm going to talk about a new type of composting that I started doing maybe 8 years ago or so. And I got this book, maybe it was more like 10 years ago, Adam Footer's Bokashi Composting, Scraps to Soil in Weeks. And that image on the right is my compost in my Bokashi bucket. That's the raw compost. You can see there's an orange rind there, front and center. And mostly what I compost is things that you can't eat. And everything that worms don't like is totally good for Bokashi. So you can actually put meat in here. You can put fish skin, cheese, bread, orange rinds, brassicas, eggshells, bones. You can make it do-it-yourself project. That's what I did at first, using buckets and these hex lids. But then I decided I wanted to upgrade last year. And I bought these prefab buckets with spouts. They're really, really easy to use. And I'll show you some pictures in just a minute. This type of compost is especially great for acid-loving plants. Blueberries, rose, azalea, rhododendron. You are required to buy the essential microorganisms or the Bokashi brand periodically because the culture is super important. And then unlike regular compost, it's buried in the soil, or you can bury it in a larger compost bin when it's completed. You can also freeze it, and it really prevents methane formation. Now, this is an anaerobic decomposition method, but it doesn't produce methane. So I'm getting prepared to bury it. It's already been processed. You can see that little bit of a white creamy stuff on the top. That's the culture. That's my little dog for comparison. And there's the hole with the shovel in it. And you dig a hole about a foot deep, a little bit more than a foot deep. And this spigot on the bottom, you capture the liquid that comes off of it and you mix it with a little bit of water and pour it on your blueberry plants or your roses or your azaleas, and they just love it. They respond very well to the Bokashi liquid. It's super acidic, and for blueberries, it is absolutely wonderful. Very nutritious, nice and acid. And here's the shallow bed. And I always put a little sealed on this date tag because I leave it for at least 2 months after I have 2 buckets. I'm filling one up, and then you compress it down with this little plunger, and then you can catch the liquid exudate at any time, but I always drain it off before I bury it because it's so valuable. Then you take the lid off and plop it in the hole, and then you put all the soil back on, tamp it down a little bit, and then you're done. And I did this on my mom's garden, and she just loved it because she has really shallow soil. She's up there near McDonald Forest. Okay, so that's the Bokashi. I'm going to go change gears now, and I'm going to talk about the indigenous South American culture in the Amazon rainforest. And we now have evidence of intentional soil building. that happened. The soil scientists started getting really excited about this because they found something called terra preta, which is black earth. And at first people were like, how come all these really poor tropical soils, all of a sudden you go over to a certain place and all of a sudden there's this black, rich topsoil. It's like, it's just really incongruous. And people were near Manaus in Brazil, they were digging it up and they were shipping it off, putting it in bags, and selling it to gardeners. And finally, soil scientists came. The whole story is in the biochar solution, and you can actually buy biochar products. I found a really nice potting soil mix and a garden soil mix with biochar in it at Susan's Garden Center on 29th and Grant. You can also buy the biochar at the annual soil amendment sale in a full bag only. And then Terra Magazine, the Oregon State University publication from fall 2013, featured an article with John Medema talking about the environmental benefits of biochar. Now, I had John come to Hewlett Packard and address the sustainability group, and he does an amazing talk. And I don't know whether you can find this publication online, but it's an amazing thing that he worked with a local forest products group. And there are people that are figuring out how to, instead of doing slash burning, they have this ceramic blanket that they can put over the slash, and then they burn it in a pyrolysis manner. It's a type of burning where you don't burn it to ash, but you rather burn off the volatile gases and you leave the lignins. It's amazing. And so then in the Umpqua National Forest, they did a lot of this, trying to enrich the forest soils. So I'm veering off into another subject. So I think that is it. I'm open for questions. I do have, I'd love to take some questions, or also I have a resources page that I'm going to put up here and leave. Let's see, go to the next slide. Got to make it, there we go. All right. So I'm going to continue sharing, but if I'm going to look at the chat now, I haven't looked at the chat. Good, somebody's put in the things in the chat so people can grab it. Thank you.
And I think I found that article you mentioned from.
Oh yeah, great.
Yeah, I think I'll put that in the chat. Sorry, my cat muted me for a second there.
Yeah, because I only have hard copy. I was actually intrigued with biochar back in probably 2009 or something like that. And I just loved the idea of something that would be carbon in the soil that would stay there for hundreds of years. And they've since done a lot of research on it, and it's promising, but it's not going to be easy to scale it. So it's one method of soil carbon sequestration. And there's an international biochar initiative that also, so thank you. Thank you so much for putting all of these links in here. And does anybody have any questions? I know I roamed all over the place and I talked about so many things.
If you have questions, you can put them in the chat. We're also a small group, so if you just want to unmute and ask your question, you're welcome to. But I'll monitor the chat and ask questions as they come up.
Right. If people can unmute themselves if they want to ask questions. All right.
I can jump in with a question for my registration form. And I'm sorry if I missed this as you were talking. I was doing a couple other things, posting some pictures of your amazing talk. Someone asked, what about moisture during our dry summers?
Yes, you will want to add water to your compost if your compost is getting too dry. The composting will not happen under desiccation conditions. There was a situation where a community garden and a bunch of people piled up a bunch of compostables in a shed with a cover, and it stayed there dry all winter long, and not any of it composted at all. And so I actually gave this talk at HP. Put up the pH slide again. Yeah. Oh, my hubby wants to ask, isn't removal of biochar from the Amazon bad for the Amazon? Nope, I'm not talking about removal of the biochar from the Amazon. We don't do that. A long time ago, before they even knew what biochar was, they were mining the soil, the terra preta. They called it terra preta, black earth. Local people near Manaus in Brazil, they were mining it and selling it to gardeners because they had no idea what it was until a soil scientist came and started writing papers about it. And they said, this is actually a human generated soil. This is not a natural soil. This is not a naturally occurring soil. This is actually a intentional human generated soil type. And they knew that from the evidence of all the bones and bone fragments and pottery fragments that are all through all of the terra preta. So yeah, so then I don't advocate removal of any of the terra preta from, but that's in Brazil, right? So the biochar that's made here in the United States, they make it out of waste material. That's why it fits in with the composting talk, because you can make clean biochar. There's some methods of, it's similar to making charcoal. It can be a very dirty process, or it can be a very clean process. And you can get gases off of it that then you can capture the heat from burning the gases and have a biochar reactor that is actually a small power plant, or use it to heat a building, or use it to do use the heat to do some other kind of work. And you get the biochar as a byproduct. So there was a bioreactor in northeastern Oregon. Tragically, it burnt down. That Netflix documentary movie, I think, has some bit about that. Okay, so then somebody asked me to go to a different slide, which was the pH slide. You can find even better pH graphics online. There's the pH. I just grabbed these numbers off of the internet. There was a slide off the internet. Okay. So there's the power of hydrogen.
Other questions that folks might have? And again, you're welcome to type them in the chat or unmute.
Right. So yeah, since you came up with the question about, does paper have toxins? Depends on the paper. I would, when I first learned about worm composting, they said use shredded newspaper or shredded other paper. And it depends on what the ink has in it. but I tend to not want to use any of that. I tend to just use leaves for my worm composting. But other people use shredded paper. I think that newsprint probably does have some pretty minor toxins in it, but it's not completely toxin free. So when you're composting for food crops, of course, you want to keep all the toxins out of there. So I just asked my neighbors and friends if they have leaves that I can have. And in the fall, I go on a giant leaf scavenge hunt. And whoever lets me take some of their leaves, I get big trash bags and I fill them with hopefully dry leaves. But oftentimes I find myself lugging around wet bags of leaves, which are much heavier. So collecting them when they're dry is much funner, and they're actually nice and fluffy and easy to handle. Aha. Yes, dioxins from bleaching, but not necessarily in the paper. Thank you, Jeanette. Yeah, I think the ink used is the primary toxin for paper. If you have a non-toxic ink, that'll be good. And I'm sure Jeanette knows much more about that than me. And I love questions because I get to learn more when people ask questions. So, yeah. So then, interestingly enough, that when they're trying to estimate how many people lived in the Amazon pre-contact, they were estimating it really low, and then they started finding more and more evidence of huge settlements, large groups of people, and they weren't sure how they did it because that land is not very productive agriculturally, and biochar is one of the reasons. By the fact that they knew that they would be able to enrich the soil with their waste products. They did some type of biochar, and then they threw it in with their waste and they composted it, and they made wonderful soil. So that's how they supported huge amounts of people in an area that wouldn't usually support that many people because the soil types are very non-productive. I think it's fascinating. I love little fascinating mysteries like that. How did this happen? What happened in ancient times? All the clues that come up. So any other questions about any of the things? Anybody did I go through any of the slides too quickly? I think I got a little bit flustered and kind of ran through the slides because I figured I was not going to have enough time. Oh, is there a community garden near HP? It is for HP employees and HP retirees only. It's on the HP campus. It's a half an acre. It's an organic only garden. And it is actually something that the Sustainability Network requested. And after years of asking, they finally did it. The first year that they did it was 2007. And I took over administering it in 2009 and spent 3 years being the lead of the Sustainability Network and being the garden lead, because the Sustainability Network lead was also had and since then, they've done a lot with it. I left HP in 2012, and they've continued to garden there, and it's wonderful because employees and their families, and of course HP retirees, can garden there for a very, very small amount of money. You can rent a plot. So it's just like any other community garden, but it's restricted to people that have access to HP because it's right on the campus. But it's really nice to have an industrial setting where you actually have people gardening right there and bringing their children to see how food is grown. There was another question.
There was a question Eric asked. I live in a large apartment complex near HP. Who can I talk to? I want to set up a community garden here. So I think maybe a broader question about process of community gardens or how to set up community gardens, if you know.
Well, you would have to, you could talk to the city, but you have to have a place first. The other community gardens that I know, there's one, of course, the Sage Garden, that in Starker Arts Park. So there needs to be either a park or some other land ownership that will allow people, the public, to have access. What about the large apartment complex? Is there any land that isn't, that doesn't have apartments on it? Maybe not. I have a large south-facing plot. Oh yes, raccoons are a problem for people who compost. Certainly, yes, raccoons come into the city. Oh, you have a half an acre? Eric says he has a half an acre. That's a half acre. That's the size of the HP community garden.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep. Hi, Eric.
Hi. Yeah, it's just the whole length of the apartment complex is a big plot. So I just the managers here are new. They're multi-state managers. They have like 700,000 people living in their apartments across the country. So they're not into composting or anything. They're just into throwing everything away, and it's really quite wasteful here. And I'm just hoping, who can I help? Who can I talk to that does this kind of stuff? Right.
So then, as far as composting, they'd have to have a yard waste. Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I know that for a residential use, you can have a yard waste cart, but I don't know that they would, Republic Services provides that. But yeah, it's like I've actually had pretty appalling experiences even with recycling for apartment complexes, let alone trying to get people to use a yard waste cart for composting. Yeah.
Yeah. It just feels like everybody here is just used to the old way of throwing everything away in the dumpster, and there's not any recycling, nothing. It's really terrible here. So I need some reinforcements. I don't want to do it myself and just go against the whole flow.
Right.
I want to go with
yeah,
the flow
no, here. Yeah, you can't do that. But it's like, that's the way of apartment dwellers. It's the people that run apartments, they're just after the bottom line.
Yep. I mean, I talked to when we just were purchased by a big conglomerate, and the big boss, she said that that she'd have to pay someone to run it, and I said, well, how about getting a volunteer to do it? And she didn't even have the concept of volunteer. So I'd have to have a plan, and if somebody already has a plan, already did it, I just want to figure out what worked and repeat.
Right. So then the HP gave a grant. The one of the biggest expenses is water.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So HP paid for the employee garden. They just paid for the water to be piped to the garden, and they pay for the water. So that's a big plus, because that's the other thing that is really going to be expensive in the city is the water. So the other places that I've seen community gardens work is for several churches have them. And even if they're on the church property, they're public. So that, yeah. So then, but in the area near, in that north section, it's beautiful land. So that's Concert.
Yes,
So go ahead.
That's where I live off of Concert and Walnut. So.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of opportunity. I mean, nobody's gardening here. We have pots and out front, but a few apartments do pots. But I think there's opportunity for other apartments. It's a lot of waste here. Maybe tons of compost go to Republic landfill every week. Tons.
Right. Yeah. I think that maybe contacting Republic Services and asking them, or asking the apartment complex if they do they have recycling bins?
Yeah, they do recycling. We have the old school recycling, glass,
right,
metal.
Yeah. Then there would be an additional bin, which is the yard waste bin, that you put all of your food waste in.
Ah, okay, that's a good.
Yeah, and I don't know why you couldn't get a yard waste bin from Republic Services, because they do that for households, but you'd have to talk to Republic Services. So it'd be a bit of work to talk, because it wouldn't cost the complex any more money, because I don't think it would anyway. So with the residential service, multi-unit recycling is very challenging to deal with due to contamination. Yes. Yes, and Benton County had the first compost facility in the whole state to be permitted to accept meat and fats. Yeah, it's a state-of-the-art composting facility north of town. It's very safe. It's just getting permission to do that and having people not abuse it, right? Because if you throw trash into the yard waste cart.
Right, yeah.
Oh, Kathy Watson wrote something. You used a yard waste bin at the sorority? Uh-oh. The women put things in it that shouldn't have gone in there. Oh, that's the problem. Is that yep. Yeah, we've so that's the main challenge right there. And you used compostable bags. Yeah, our compost facility. Thank you. Yep, compostable bags are not accepted. Yeah, that's yeah, there's a lot of room for innovation. There's a lot of things that need to get into place so that we have the infrastructure for large scale composting. And the bins are free from Republic Services for a household. But I don't know for an apartment complex if they would be willing to do that. But it sounds like they did for the sorority. Jeanette said, yes, they are. So all you have to do is get permission. Okay, if they often get contaminated. So what I did with my bins at my condominium complex, because we used to have a lot of rentals, there's only 9 units, but at one point, 7 out of 9 of them were rentals and only 2 were owner occupied. So we had turnover. So what needs to happen is that an aggressive labeling campaign, right? Yeah. So the landlords pull them because they get charged for tipping them as trash if they are contaminated, right? Green teams are needed. Yep. So you'd have to have a education campaign similar to what we do for the recycling, the recycling block captains, another sustainability coalition thing. So in your complex, You'd have to do a good job of educating everybody and keep doing that. Because what I would do is I'd put colorful signs on all of the bins, and I'd go and talk to the new people and I'd say, can I help you understand how we do things here? And the signs of contamination are that it's got trash in it.
Trash.
Yep.
Okay. Well, we're encouraged here just to put everything down our garbage disposal, and we're not encouraged to compost. They don't like it. It's
That's
dirty,
right.
messy.
That's
They
right.
don't want it.
Yeah, they don't want it. They
just don't want it, and they want you to put it down the drain, which is probably not good.
Right. Well, it enters into the water treatment facility, and it ultimately gets to the river.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It just seems like an uphill battle, and I haven't faced it. So alone, I just don't want to do it alone. It's no point.
Oh, there we go. Jeanette, thank you. You posted the what's okay and not okay in the curbside composting.
Oh, great.
So
thank you.
About contamination. We're talking about people just putting a plastic bottle in there. That's contaminated yard waste or compost. Right. And so the larger the complex, the harder it'll be to get to everyone to make sure that they do it right.
Okay, thank you. I'll call this number. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Oh, good. Yeah. Yeah. Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you so much.
I feel your pain because every time I see resources being lost and wasted, it hurts. It hurts. All those nutrients should be back in the cycle of life.
Exactly.
And the fact that it isn't is hard. So thank you for being altruistic and wanting to be part of the solution. That's admirable.
We're all part of the solution here.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for being part of it. All right. Kathy says she's going to look into the Bokashi. Great. Yeah. Yeah. I really like it. There's a lot of companies online, not a lot, but a few, but there's one called Bokashi Cycle. I really like his products.
Well, can you make your own Bokashi, home culture Bokashi? Have you tried that before?
No, because it really does require a lab. You wouldn't try to make your own probiotics because you wouldn't know what you had. And in fact, making your own compost, you need the correct complement of microorganisms.
So you have to be a scientist to make your own stuff, basically.
You gotta have a lab.
Yeah.
You gotta have a lab to make your own essential microorganism concentrated liquid that then you introduce to the brand with some molasses, some food for them. And I've made the Bokashi brand myself using molasses and a gallon of the essential microorganisms that I got from a place called Terraganics. My friend Teresa and I did that out at her farm, and we made the Bokashi brand. And I left it wet and used it for about a year, but you have to keep it in a sealed container. Yeah. And then it's really fun. And it smells a little bit different. It smells like a ferment. It definitely has that fermented food kind of smell to it. It's a different smell than compost. The Bokashi is definitely different. And it's definitely, now there is a lot of indigenous microorganism farming techniques. All over Asia, they use that. My brother lives in Thailand with his Thai wife and her older siblings, and they have all these ancient little things that they do, all these cultures that they make with microorganisms, and then they put them on the plants. That's different than the Bokashi composting.
Well, I make bread, so I have my own native culture for my bread. I don't need to buy anything for bread. You know,
That's right.
So I mean, why
yeah,
can't I do that with Bokashi with my like bread?
Because it's a different process. Making bread yeast, you can, and also if you, so sourdough bread yeast,
Yeah,
is wild and ubiquitous.
right.
But the essential microorganisms, how do you concentrate them and have just those microorganisms? That's what the yep, okay, that's what the question would be, is how well can you isolate those?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'd like to find out more about using native species to do that, but like bread. But I don't know if anybody's doing that.
Oh yeah, they're doing it all over Asia, and you can find it on the web.
Oh, great.
It's called indigenous microorganisms, IMs.
Oh, IMs.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you.
Yep, you can look it up. There's a lot of people. They do all kinds of weird things, all kind of weird mixtures. Like I said, my brother's wife and her older siblings, they do things that people have been doing for who knows how long back in Thailand. They make all kinds of cultures that then they introduce to the soil for the plants.
Well, I'll look up IMs on the internet and see where that takes me.
Yeah, you'll find a wealth of information.
Thank you.
We have about a minute or so left. Does anyone have a question for Linda? The last question before we wrap up our evening. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Linda. I learned so much this evening about composting, and thank you for the wealth of resources you shared with everyone. This was great, and I hope everyone learned something, is going to go start figuring out how to compost this upcoming weekend, this weekend. So all the resources were linked in the chat. So if you want to make sure you've opened those links and everything before we head out for the evening, make sure you do that. We will post this to YouTube if you want to come back and rewatch if there's something that you missed. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are not having an August Tap Talk. We are taking a bit of a break so we can prepare for fall. So this will be our last Tap Talk till September. But if you want to learn more about what the 500 Women Scientists Corvallis Pod is up to, you can follow us on social media. We have a Facebook page and Instagram page and Twitter. And you can also check out our website for upcoming events and things like that as well. So thank you so much. I hope everyone has a great evening, and hopefully we'll see you in September, maybe in person for our next Tech Talk in Block 15. And thank you again, Linda, for a great talk. We really, really appreciate it.